When you install Visio on your machine, not only do you get a top-notch diagramming tool, but you also get an application that is capable of some very light CAD duty. Now, Visio is no replacement for AutoCAD or CATIA or SolidWorks or Mentor Graphics applications, but you'll find that you can do some light mechanical design and some fairly decent plan and elevation drawings for architectural layouts. One of the elements that's vital to these types of drawings is dimension lines and dimensioning. And rather than create a separate feature for dimension lines, as a lot of CAD programs do, Visio includes them as a set of shapes. Now, these shapes have some complicated behaviors that aren't initially obvious, so I thought I'd demonstrate those to you right now. They're not hard to use, but they do take some getting used to. So the first thing you want to do is find these shapes, and they're located under Visio Extras, and you'll see there's 3 dimensioning stencils, 2 engineering for metric and US, and 1 for architectural with US units. And they're all essentially the same set of shapes, but they have a few default settings different, such as the units that they display, and the architectural has a different line end because architects like to use these slashes instead of arrows on the end of their dimension lines. So let's just open the US units one. And you can see there's quite a set of shapes here for linear and angular dimensions and a few special case ones down at the bottom. And let's just drag out a typical one, a horizontal dimension line, and talk about how we can use this. Now you'll see we've got the one-dimensional or 1D shape blue handles here, and I generally try to start with those when I want to figure out how to use the dimension line shape. Now this is the horizontal shape, so no matter what I do with it, it stays horizontal. You can see I can move the 1D endpoints around, and the dimension line stays horizontally oriented. Once I've figured out what the 1D handles do, then I look for the yellow control handles, and you can see there's even tooltips here that say change the dimension height and reposition the text. So you can see we can do things like that, which is really important when you get into a situation like that where you say, no, I actually want the dimension line to be outside the bits that I'm dimensioning. So you just pull on the control handle to get that to happen. Similarly, as the dimension line gets small, the arrows jump out, the text jumps out eventually, but you might want it positioned up here, like that. And the thing is, and if you do end up making the dimension line wider at some point, you might want to reset that text position. And the one way to do that is to right-click and say, reset text position. And now you're back to the default where it'll jump out automatically, etc., etc. So there's some customization you can do with the handles and the right mouse clicks, and positioning, basic raw positioning is done through 1D handles. Let's look at a different one. We've got vertical flavors, and this dimension line always stays vertical. You can see again. Let's dimension our stock CAD drawing 101 part that we used to do back in drafting class. Now, if you've ever had drafting class, you'll recognize these blocks or broom holders that nobody knows what they're for, but they're nice for dimensioning. So imagine this is some sort of bracket that would be inside of a car or an airplane, and we need to put some dimensions on it. So you can see the vertical dimension line is great for doing the bits of this shape here. You can see as I go there, the dimension line's in the wrong location, so we'll just pull this out like that. Similarly, we could add another one and do the next bit and just pull that so that it's further out like that. And you can see it's turning out to be quite nice and orderly. So similarly, we can start dimensioning the horizontal parts like that. Now, you don't have to use horizontal and vertical. You can also use the aligned shapes. And aligned is just a way for saying these work at any angle. And you can start with an aligned even shape, and let's just see what happens as we pull the handles. You can see, okay, that goes inside where I don't want it, so let's pull the control handle out. The tricky part then is, how do I dimension from here to this point, but in a straight line? You can see that if I do that, that's not correctly showing what I want. So then you look for the aligned uneven shape, and this is more tricky with the handles. You can see that the 1D endpoint doesn't really do anything but set the angle. It doesn't set the length of it. So we place one handle there just to set the angle. Pull out the dimension line so it's a little bit higher, and then pull this third handle out here, like that. So now we're using the 1D handles to set the angle. You can see what happens as I rotate that around. And then we're using a third control handle to actually set the end of the dimension. And then we, as the other ones work, just move the height up and down. You can see that for the engineering set, the text stays level no matter how the dimension line is rotated. That's one of the differences for engineering. I think the architectural dimension lines, the text actually stays in line with the line itself. Just a minor difference, not a really big deal. Now, if you don't want 2 units of precision, or you want to show the units, there's ways to do that. You might have noticed that when I selected dimension line shape, you've got some precision settings here. So we could say that we don't want any precision here, or we want 4 digits like that. We can choose to show the units. If we show the units, you can see inches shows up there. Let's see, you can use the drawing pages units, or you can choose, we could say we want miles, in which case this is so small nothing shows up. So let's pick something other. We could switch to metric and say millimeters, and we do know that this happens to be exactly 1 inch, so we've got 25.4 millimeters, which is 1 inch. So that's nice, except that now I have to do that for every dimension line on the page if I want to change the look of it, or I have to remember to do it before I start. And the way you don't actually have to do that much work. What you can do is right click on the shape and say set as the page default. Then any shape, any dimension shape that's using the page's default will change as well. So first thing we want to do is make another shape slightly different. We'll just make this one 3 units of precision. We'll show its units, which are still inches, and the rest are just set to default. So now we'll right click back on the one we've edited, and we'll say set as page default, and you can see that the units have changed for all of these. The precision has changed to 4 digits for these 3 shapes, and this shape, it's still inheriting from the page whether to show the units, but it has an override for its number of precision and its number of digits that it shows. So if we want this shape to also behave the same as all the others, we can right click it and say revert to page default, and now it's accepting all the default settings for the entire page. There's no ribbon tab or menu for controlling the dimension lines. There's no way to set the page explicitly. You have to style a dimension line the way you want it, and then right click and say push the settings I have to the page as the default, and then other dimension lines that respect the default of the page will update. So it's a little bit different way of going about it, but it does get the job done, and you have quite a bit of flexibility. You'll also notice that a lot of these items in the shape data window can be accessed by right clicking a shape. You've got precision and units. When you do that, a pop-up dialog appears that shows you the same bits of information that you have in the shape data window. Just cancel that. So those are linear dimension lines. You might be interested in some of the radial ones, like let's see, showing an angle and showing radius and diameters of circles. And you can see here we've got an arc radius. Let's actually do a diameter. This is a nice shape. Let's go down here in the space just to show you how it works. One handle is put at the center of the circle. The other handle says where do I want the leader line, and then the third control handle actually specifies the radius. Now the trick with using this is to be able to snap to the center of the circle, and that takes me to a little side discussion on snap and glue settings in Visio. What you want to do is go to the View tab, and the Visual Aids group has a dialog box launcher. If you click on that, the snap and glue dialog pops up, and it's got all sorts of nice options. But for dimension lines, the main things you want to have, the main settings you want to check are snap to shape geometry, which we've got checked already, which is why we were able to dimension this part so well already. Shape vertices or shape points on each shape is also checked, so we're very easily snapping to the corners of this part. And if you're really into technical drawing, things like that, you'll want to go to the Advanced tab where there's a whole bunch of extra stuff, such as snapping to extensions of curves. Say you had a line segment, you'll be able to snap to an extension of this line segment past where the actual geometry is. We've got midpoints of lines. We've got curved extensions, like if you only had 3/4 of a circle, you could Visio actually says, oh, he might want to snap to a point on the rest of the circle that doesn't exist. But what we really want is ellipse center point for our diameter dimension line. So I urge you to take some time to explore these and see what happens when you click them. These are just little guides, temporary guides that pop up to help you to snap to things that you might need to complete a technical drawing. And it brings Visio a little bit closer to being a CAD tool. So we'll say OK with that. And now you'll see that when I drag the center point of this diameter dimension, it snaps to the center of the circle, which I wouldn't have had before. Now we've got snap to geometry, so it's pretty easy to get a point on the diameter of the circle, which sets our diameter. And again, this is a 1-inch circle, and you can see that we've got 25.4 millimeters as the radius, which is great. So I can position this around anywhere I want it. Generally, you see that the text kind of jumps to the side that makes sense. That's just general smart shape behavior. So let's just put it out here by itself like that. Nice and neat and orderly. For angles, you've got various flavors, angle, uneven, and the icons are trying to show you that you might not have the identical legs to connect to, whereas if you've got a nice pie chart chunk, then you could use the angle center. So angle uneven is going to be the most complicated one. Let's start with that. So I'm going to first start with the 1D handles, as I usually do, and I put that at the vertex of the angle. Bring this one over here to another point, and you can see I'm way too far out because I really want to show this angle. Let's see what this handle does. That sets the actual angle. We'll turn off Outlook there, sorry about that. And we'll bring the radius in like that. So that's pretty complicated. We have one point for the vertex of the angle, one point along a leg that defines that angle, a control handle along the other point, and then finally a handle to move the dimension in or out, and we can reposition the text if we want. So there, that's that. Reason I pulled it away is because I wanted to see if there were extension lines that you might not want to have when you're doing an angle, and they're turned off right now by default, which is probably a good thing. If I right click on this shape, you can see there's an extension line setting, and that allows me to show first extension only. Oh, it seems to not be working. That's interesting. Okay. So now you'll notice that the object lines of the shape are dark gray and that the extension lines of the dimension shapes are black. And you don't see any extension lines here, and that's because the shape knows that it's inside of where the extension lines would normally be. So let's just turn them off so that they don't obscure the object lines of the thing that we're dimensioning. So let me drag out a copy, control drag a copy here, show you what I'm talking about. If I move the shape out, you can see that the extension lines start to show once the dimension is beyond any of these shapes. So if I were to make this shape a lot smaller, like that, then we see the extension lines once they're outside of the defining handles. So that's nice that the shape is smart enough to do that for us. There's another feature that I want to show where you can customize the display of the extension lines if the built-in smart behavior isn't exactly what you want. So let's look at this case here. Say we're quite happy with dimensioning this little chunk right here, but what we don't like, well, let's move it out a little bit. What we don't like is that the extension line here is on top of the object line for the thing we're dimensioning. That doesn't look good. It's not clean. So what we can do is right-click and choose extension lines, and we can selectively turn these on and off. So you're going to have to test a little bit to see which one is which, unless you're really good with your 1D endpoints. So if you look down here, the 1D begin point, I believe, is the blue one, and the end is the white one. So we actually want to turn off the begin point to get this extension line to disappear. So let's see if we get it right. I know I've written about this several times, but I do forget as well. So let's say begin only, hit OK, and you can see that extension line has disappeared. I'll drag this out just to prove it to you. We're showing one extension line. So that's a nice little bit of fine control that you can do to further customize the dimensioning in your drawing. So just to reiterate what we've talked about, you've got the stencil, the 3-dimensioning stencils under Visio Extras. You position 1D handles first, then control handles. You can right-click and use shape data fields to change precision, units, and a few other settings. And in order to update the default setting for a page, right-click and say Set as Page Default, or revert a customized dimension line to so that it accepts the default dimension settings for the page. If you don't like to have both extension lines showing, you can right-click and choose which one to show. And that's just about everything you're going to want for dimension lines.